So today, as part of the last class, we'll be looking at AWS Architecture Framework and best practice. I think this is really, really good. I think we've seen so many things. So in the last class, we were talking about cost optimization, right? So meaning the hope is that, oh, now we've started building in AWS. Now it's time to pay attention to the cost, meaning the money you may be charged knowingly, like if you do something knowingly or unknowingly. So we did look at many of the ways that you could keep track, whether you're trying to just find out I'm trying to use this service, how much will it cost? You can go to a calculator, find that out, right? But we also looked at ways where if you already have something deployed, you can set a number of alerts, budgets here and there for you to more or less like be informed if something goes wrong, right? So today it's more or less like we're talking about architecture and then best practice, right? You need this. Trust me, a lot of the things that I'm going to say today is the things you'll need going forward, right? A lot of them will be theoretical, but if you want to stay till the end of the class, I want you to stay because I'll really be pouring my heart to you in terms of like the things that I've seen in my more than going to 7 years of being in this industry, like building in the cloud. So I'll just be pouring out my heart in terms of like the frameworks that I've seen, and the best practice also. Okay. But again, before we start that, there is really a service I want us to talk about, security token service, STS. I don't think I mentioned it, and I really wanted to mention this service before I start talking about the other things that we're going to talk about. Uh, but it's what we start from there. And then we'll go into the well-architected framework. We'll talk about the well-architected tool. We'll talk about the cloud adoption framework. We'll talk about partners, marketplace, and all the support resources that you'll be seeing throughout your journey where you need one or the other. Okay, so let's talk about security token service. So somehow we've used this in one way or the other, right? So the thing is that whenever you see yourself using roles, for example, you'll notice that roles, they are not, if you create a user in the AWS account, you can always go there and generate credentials, right? But if you think about it, those credentials that you generate would always be there. They will always be there. It means that if somebody steals that credential, they will always be able to use it, right? And that's why in AWS there's a concept of STS, the fact that you can actually get temporary credentials for you to do the same things that you would have done if you were to use access keys, right, that you generated from a user. So the STS service itself is responsible for providing temporary security credentials, right? Usually those credentials, you can set them to expire between 15 minutes to like 12 hours. And the beauty of it is that it's really one of the things that helps you to start benefiting from doing cross-account access, right? Because for the most part, sometimes you have an account, you have another account, and sometimes you want this account to be able to do something in another account, right? So it means that at some point you need to more or less like get temporary credentials to be able to do that cross-account access. And we're going to see an example, right? So and it's good. STS is really good because yeah, it gives you temporary credentials. It means that you don't those credentials can always expire. They can always expire, right? It's not fixed credential that somebody will use after another day or after another month, right? So if you look at the key use case, there's a lot of places you use it. Cross account access, obviously, you need it, and we'll see an example how that works. You also need it for federation. Federation is just there's so many corporate identities, right? Because if you think about it, people usually have more or less like they have like Google. For example, they use Google for their managing users, giving users email, right? At some point, maybe instead of them creating new set of users in AWS, they'll just use Google, for example, to federate their user into AWS. That's really what federation is. And the point is that you have your users maybe on Google, for example, your groups, your users on Google, and then for them to log into your AWS account, you can just they can use their same Google login, and then they will use that same SSO to come in. That's what's called federation. So it's integrated, like when you integrate with corporate identity systems. In this case, I'm using Google as an example, but there are so many options that are out there. Okay. And temporary access is like grant, time limited permissions. Really, that's the beauty of STS, right? So no need to store those long-term credentials. If you ever see yourself storing long-term credentials, you always need to ask yourself, why are you doing that, right? It's always not best practice whenever you see yourself keeping long-term credentials, right? Um, it means that the credentials can also be rotated automatically and obviously enhances your security posture. So when you hear, for example, RBAC, role-based, when you think about role-based authentication, this is where it really comes in because now instead of users having credentials, they can use a role and those credentials will always continue to rotate themselves, right? So if you look at the core operations, there are many things, but today we're going to use the assume role, right? So it has a lot of operations, but I did mention a few here. Assume role is the one I'm going to show you, and I'll show you exactly how it works. But the thing is that you can assume a role. So we said a role would give you temporary credentials with the help of STS. And then what it means is that you can assume. So the operation is actually you can assume a role, right? So one, and you see how that works. But the point is that in one account, you can have another account, and in that second account, you can have a role there. And then instead of the user in the other account can basically assume the role on the other account and then be able to now perform operations within the account where the role that is assuming. But you see that with an example, right? What it means is that you assume the role, it gives you temporary credentials, and then you can use that, right? So it's the most common STS operation that is out there, and it's very, very good for when you want to do cross-account access. But there's also assume role with web identity, right, which is used for authenticating via like web identity providers. Okay, so for example, Facebook, Google, like the Google that we talked about, for example, if you have like your users who already have like you have users and groups in Google, you can actually use them to more or less like do web identity, assume role with web identity to come into your AWS system, right? So although AWS recommends Cognito instead, which is a note here, so that just you take note of it. So for example, also another way I've seen assume role web identity is like you have your GitHub actions, and they can actually use instead of you specifying credentials for your GitHub actions, you can actually have them assume a role within your account, right? And the web identity here is the fact that you're integrating GitHub to your AWS, and all that can happen seamlessly, and you don't need to manage any credentials. And there's also get session token if you wanted to do for like MFA authenticated users. It can also provide temporary credentials with MFA validation. So these are some of the operations, but here I'm going to show you assume role, and you see how powerful it is. And but there are other ones as time goes on, as you get familiar, you see that they're all from STS, but they serve different purpose. Okay, so let's see what assume role is going to look like, and I'll show you a typical use case, like a problem we're trying to solve here. Okay, so I have two accounts. In order for this to work, I have two accounts. So there is this account here. I just hope you guys can see it clearly, but I have two accounts. So I have an account that is here. You can see the account number, and then I have another account that is here, basically, right? So this account is 3 something, and then this one is 5 something, right? The point is, I want to be able to, from this account, I want to be able to do an operation in the other account. Okay, so that's what I want to do. So what we are going to do is to make it sync. I'm going to do IAM, right? So I'm going to create an IAM role. I'll create an IAM role here. Just to do that, I'm going to create an IAM role. So I'll create a role, and then I'll say which service is going to use it. In this case, I'm going to do EC2. Okay, so I'm going to do EC2. I'm going to do next, and then I'm going to do SSM call, right? Just so that I can go in. So we've done this before. So it's managed instance call, just to be able to use SSM to go in, right? So think about it. This is account A, right? So I'm going to do next. When I do next, I'm just going to say my EC2 EC2 role, okay? And then I think it already exists. So my EC2 cross account, I'll call it cross account role, okay? So I'll call it that just to signify what we're trying to do. And then I'm going to create the role, okay? So the role has been created. And then so what I'm going to do on the other hand is I'm just going to go into the second account. So in the first account, I created a role, right? I'm going to go to the second account, and I'm also going to create a role also in the other account. In this case, I'm going to call it something else. So I'll go to roles. So I think I'm there already. So I'm going to create a role. So this is in account B, right? So here, what I'm going to do is, first of all, remember we created a role. So what I'm going to do is look for the role that we created. I think it's called cross account, right? So this is the role. I'm just going to get the ARM here. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to create a role, right? And then do a custom trust policy. In this case, so I'm creating a role, but instead of using most times we just do AWS service, AWS account, web identity. There are so many things you can do. But here I'm going to be doing a custom, more or less like a custom assume role. So in this case, I'm saying I want a principal that is AWS to be able to assume. And in this case, I'm saying, notice this account is actually different from the account that is up there, right? So in this case, I'm saying the person should be able to assume this role. So that's the trust policy that I have. And then what I really want to do is maybe I want to give them SNS full access. Remember, you can always stream this down, right? But here, I just want to give them SNS full access. That's what I want to test. So I'm going to do this. And then here, the name I'm going to call the role is I'm going to call the role, let me just call it this. So I'll call it cross account publisher, right? And then I'll say my cross account publisher, because that's really what it is, because there's another account. So if you think about it, I am saying who can assume this role? This person, and this person is in a different account, right? And then when this person assumes the role, what can you do? You have SNS full access. Remember, you can always tune this down however you want. And I'm just going to create the role. So at this point, I've created a role, right? I've created a role. So what I'm going to do is, as usual, let's go to our friend, which is quick to demo. So I'm just going to do SNS. I'll create, I'm just going to create a simple, just a simple topic, right? I'll create a topic. Remember, we gave it full access. We didn't really limit it to any topic. So I'm just going to call it my SNS, my topic. I'm just going to call it my topic. In this case, it's going to be a standard message. I'm just going to leave everything as is. I'll create a topic, right? And quickly, I'm just going to go to 10-minute mail. I mean, this is our friend. I'm just going to copy this email. I'll quickly create a subscription. You notice I'm a bit fast because we've gone through this over and over again. So I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I'm just going to paste this email here, and then I'll create the subscription, right? So once the subscription is created, I'll get an email, and the email says, let me see, it's waiting for emails, right? It's here. I'm just going to confirm the subscription. Subscription has been confirmed. So if I go back to subscriptions, or I go to that topic and I click on the topic and I click on subscription, I have an email that has already been subscribed, right? So what do we want to do? We've created one account. We created a role here. That role has SNS full access, right? Which is not good because in this case, we're saying full access. But ideally, you want to tie it to this topic. Maybe you just want them to be able to assume that role and only be able to publish to this topic, right? So you can stream that policy as much as you want. In this case, we're just trying to keep it simple, okay? So I'm in my other account now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to launch an EC2 instance. So think about your EC2 instance in this case as a machine that pretty much, think about it, it's just like, to me, I will call this like a workload, right? Maybe like an application that is running inside of that EC2 machine. So I'm going to call it my web server, okay? In the other account, nothing fancy, just going to use all the Linux 2010 to 23 here. T2 Micro is going to proceed without a keep here. The only thing I want to really pay attention to is allow SSH from everywhere is fine. Maybe I don't even need that. But the only thing I want to do is to make sure I set the role to the role that I created before, right? So if you think about it, it's the cross account, my cross account role, because it has the systems manager core permission, right? So I don't really need anything to be there. I'm just going to launch the EC2 instance. Okay, so let's give it time. So what have we done? We are creating an EC2 instance. It is using the role. It is using the role, and that role. Let me just confirm that role actually has permission for IAM to assume it, right? Let me see. Let me check. Let me just be sure, because we are using it for EC2 instance. I just need to be sure that it has EC2 instance has permission to assume it. So we'll see trust relationship. Yeah, it does. So it has. So what we are just going to do is that we're going to, while that is still creating the EC2 instance, we're going to attach an inline policy, right? So in this case, we're just going to do JSON. So we're going to see, in this case, what do we fill in now? So the action we want to do, because we are still talking about STS. So here we're going to say allow the action we want to allow. In this case, we want to actually allow STS assume role, and then on which resource. We want to do a cross account, right? So there is a cross account role that we created here. So we're also trying to give the EC2 permission to do so cross. I think we call it a publisher, right? So publisher, we'll do this. We'll look for the ARN. It's here. We'll copy it, and then we're giving that. So we're going to say the resource is this one, right? So we'll do this, right? And then we're just going to do next, So and then we'll say allow assume publisher. You have to name things well so that when you look at them later, you understand exactly why you are doing it. But you can see it's STS, it's assume, we are setting room for us to be able to assume the role that is in the other account. So we're going to create that policy. So now it has two permissions. SSM call is just for us to be able to do SSM into the machine. The second one is really for us to be able to assume the other role. Remember here, there's nothing like SNS. There's nothing, right? There's nothing like SNS here. All we just have is we just want to assume role. So just think about it that whenever we assume this role, it is whatever this role has on the other end that we can do, right? If it doesn't have the permission, we'll not be able to do anything. So we're just going to check our EC2 instance and see if it has finished launching. Remember, your EC2 instance in this case is just an example, but it could also be like a machine. It could be, any workload that you have that is out there. It could be maybe your application itself that is doing something cross account, right? It could be that. So what we will then do is that you remember at the end of the day, we want to basically copy. We want to copy our topic. So what we are going to do is I'm just going to do. So we will call the second account account B, right? So the second the account we want to operate with, we'll call it account B, right? So what I will just do is I'll go to Systems Manager. I'm just going to do this. I hope you guys can see it. Let me just zoom this in a bit so that it's clear. But what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to paste this. Let's see. Just trying to see if I can. I'm just going to paste this. Paste. Just want to name it correctly. So I'm just going to do this is equal to the ARN of the topic here. So it's this one. Oh, I didn't even create it in US East. Well, let's see. It should work. It should work either ways. Let's see. Paste. Okay. So what we just did is we just used that variable basically to hold the topic, right? That's what we're doing here. So the next thing we want to do is we also want to more or less like use like a variable, because I have a command that I've already written. So role BARN. Remember, from here we still have to assume the role. We've set up the permission. Everything we're doing before now is to set up the permission. But here we've set the ARN of the topic that is in the different account is this. And now we're also saying the role that we want to assume for us to be able to do our job is the cross-account publisher, right? So which is this one? It's an IAM role. So in this case, we're just going to go back here and say, we'll paste it here, right? So role BARN, right? So here, what we can do, I think you've seen me do this before, but we can actually do get caller identity at this point, right? Identity. So I'm trying to say, who am I? Like logged into this machine. You can see for now, I'm still saying I'm my EC2 cross account role. So right now, I am still the person who the EC2 machine, I'm still the role the EC2 machine is using. That's really who I am right now. So the next thing I want to do is I want to assume a different role, right? Because I want to be able to do an operation with a different account. So for that reason, I have to be able to assume that role. So what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to do paste. I have a simple command, right? I'm basically assuming a role that is in B. I'm giving it a session name, and I'm just fetching out the access key ID, the access secret session token, and then I'm pushing it into a set of variables, right? So access key ID, access key secret, and then the AWS session token. Okay, these are really things you need for you to be able to do whatever you're doing, right? Especially if you set it within your console, it can basically give you a set of credentials for you to work with. So I'm going to do this. It did work, so we didn't get any error, right? So we've assumed that role now, right? And it has spilled this out, right? So how you know is that if I do copy and I do echo, let's say I echo this, right? I do this one and I paste, $ this. I don't know why. Sometimes I'm just working from this laptop. Sometimes it's like Windows. Let me paste. No, I'm pasting the wrong thing now. But I actually just want to echo what I have there, and I don't want to type it. But if I do this and I copy one of these ones, so copy and I paste it here, what you see is that there's actually a value. So the command that we ran before pushed those value into the console. It's actually in the terminal. So what I can do is I can run another command. The command is simple. I'm just trying to export all those things that were written in the console. I'm trying to export it, right? So that it's now in my shell, right? Now that it's in my shell, what I will now do is that I will now run a different command again that says, in this case, remember we did get caller identity before. It showed us like it was the EC2 role, but I'm going to run it again and see who are we now, right? can you see it has changed? So the first time we ran that command, we were EC2 role. The second time we are running it now because we have assumed a different identity. We are now cross-account publisher, right? So what it means is that we actually have the power of this guy to do whatever we want to do. And how are we going to test that? We just basically need to do the region is going to be, I just need to make sure I fix this region because I noticed that account was in US West 2, US East 1, right? So because the SNS topic was created in EU East 1. So I'm going to paste it and you'll see the command. But it's basic command that you know. I'm doing SNS, AWS SNS publish. The topic ARN is topic ARNB, and I'm saying message is hello from account A via assumed role B, and the region is really US East 1, right? So I'm doing more or less like I'm doing that. So let's do this and see. Yeah, it did publish, right? It did publish. You can see, so I'm actually publishing message from an account, from one account to a different account. And how are we going to confirm? I don't need to check anywhere. I basically should be able to go here, and you can see it here. It says hello from account A via assumed role B, right? So the point is that we assume the role in B, and we're able to get all the permissions that that role has, right? And that's the power of STS. But the good thing is that you assume that role is all temporary. It's all temporary. After a while, you need to refresh that token again for you to be able to perform the operation. And it's good. It's good because now you're not really keeping. So every time you assume the role, it's going to give you a new set of credentials that you're going to use to do whatever you want to do, right? But it just shows you this is something you're going to see every now and then. Like it's going to be something you just be used to, because at the end of the day, you usually have, right now you're working one account, but as time goes on, you have multiple accounts that you're dealing with, and you will need cross-account access. Whether it's ECR, you're trying to reach out to ECR, you just need cross-account access. And sometimes some of these things you can do them using policy-based access, like resource-based policy, right? But sometimes it's not in a lot of cases where resource, you can actually set that at the resource level. And that's where policy, this pattern would work for the most part, right? So there's a role in the other account, there's a role in both accounts, and then you create a trust policy that allows the role in A to assume the role in B, and then in B is where you set all the permissions that you can do once you get the permission. Remember here we did full access, but you can also tighten it, and make it. So after, I don't want to bore you with cleaning up, but honestly, I'm going to go back, just delete the EC2 instance, remove the SNS topic, but I'm just going to leave that as part of, it's something I'll do on the side so that I don't waste your time. The point is that I'm just going to go back, everything I created, I'm going to get rid of them. So if you went through this process, just make sure you do those cleanup, right? But again, all the things we created are not, they are not out of this world. The point is that STS is very powerful. It's something you're going to see as part of your journey. One of it that I just showed, the capabilities, assume role, but there's also assume role with web identity, right? Which is also something you're going to see. And as time goes on, you need to know the difference, when to use which, cool. So let's go back to the slide. That's really one of the practicals that I wanted to show you today because I feel it's very, very important. You're going to see a lot of patterns that you do with it as time goes on, okay? So let's continue. For the other ones, it's just going to be me pouring out my heart, right? Remember, this is really the last class. This is really the last class. So it's really a good time for me to start pouring out my heart in terms of like the things that I've seen in the industry and, how my knowledge, I'll just be sharing that experience, right? So we will now be looking at the well-architected framework, right? And what is it? What is the well-architected framework? It is called, I think my mouse is not in the right place. Let me move it to the other screen. Okay, cool. Some of you may have heard this. I mean, it's a term that is out there, but it's WAF, right? So I think it's called well-architected review. So war, like war, right? So, but the point is that honestly, this is like, for me, this is like the key. This is something that every other thing that you're building, all the things we've learned, all the using compute and all that, everything boils down to the well-architected framework, right? Because everything that you're going to be doing as part of your cloud journey will fall here. And it's basically how AWS gauges if you're actually doing best practice, right? It's more or less like a set of best practices and guidance for your cloud architecture, right? It means that there are templates that if you follow, you pretty much can say, yes, my architecture is really following the well-architected framework, right? because it's a framework that actually measures if you are doing things correctly, right? At the beginning, yes, you maybe because you were in a hurry to build some things, but at every if you notice when we're talking about the different kinds of pricing option, I know we did talk about the enterprise support plan being one where you can actually talk to AWS engineers, where you can actually review your architecture. So what it means is that, yeah, it's fine. Maybe you were building in a rush, but at some point you need to go back, sit down, and see if you're actually meeting the pillars, right? And there are six of them: operational excellence, security, reliability, performance, efficiency, cost optimization, and sustainability, right? So it's developed by AWS Solutions Architect because they've seen a lot of patterns, and the whole idea is to make sure that whenever you're building, you're following these best practices, right? So based on real world customer implementation, like I've said, they've seen a lot of customers, so they know it all, and then helps build secure, high performing, resilient infrastructure, right? So what's the purpose? The purpose is really to understand trade-offs in architectural decisions. So what it means is that when you're taking decisions in your cloud journey, you need to understand the trade-offs, right? And this will help you more or less like put you in a well in a good place in terms of like the well-architected framework, right? So identify areas of improvement, meaning, yeah, from day one, it doesn't mean like you have everything sorted. Sometimes you continue to review architecture to make those improvements, right? Consistent approach to evaluating architectures, and then you're also learning AWS best practice, right? Cool. So let's now talk about the pillars one after the other, right? And I'm going to be speaking based on my experience, right? So when you talk about operational excellence, what are you talking about? You're really talking about running, right, and monitoring systems to deliver business value. So you see the word running and then monitoring, right? Is really what you're looking at. Operation, right? You say DevOps, Cloud Ops, FinOps. That ops there is really operational, right? So, and when you say operation, there is going to be something that is either running, monitoring, So when you run, the focus here is really the way you run and the way you monitor your systems, right? Is really what tells if you are operationally efficient or if you're operationally excellent. Okay, so when you look at the key principles, and there are many things, we've seen a lot of them, right? Actually, throughout this series, right? But one of it is really infrastructure as code, because we've seen it that if you really want to be excellent, you can't tell people to go to the console and be installing stuff, right? People need to basically write infrastructure as code, and we've seen many of the benefits. So this is not where I'm going to tell you exactly why infrastructure as code is good, because we know that you can hand that template over, you can put best practice in those templates, you can always get the same result every time you use those templates, right? That's why infrastructure as code is good. Frequent small reversible changes is also good, right? You don't do one big bang change and just roll out your infrastructure, right? There was an outage recently in AWS, and you could see that it took some hours, but it was resolved, right? Think about it, that if that change that caused that bug was like very huge, it's going to take them a while for them to find the fix, revert, and do all that, which is why one of the pillars of operational excellence, one of the tenets of operational excellence is that your changes should be small. They should be frequent, but small and reversible. So if something goes wrong, it's easy for you to just turn it, revert it, right? And then you have to refine those procedures, right? So operations, all the procedures around your operations, refine them frequently, okay? If you see an operation that works right now that you have, it's not cast in stone. Sometimes you look at as your process is evolving, you also need to adjust your operation. So you refine it frequently, and then anticipate failure. Yes, there will be those days. So anticipate failures and then learn from events. So for example, at some point, maybe there was one day there were too many people on your system, and then all of a sudden your system started behaving in a certain way. You have to learn from that, right? You have to learn from that kind of event and then document what worked and what did not work, right? All that is going to actually help you to be operationally excellent, right? Over time. It's not like something happens and you pay less attention and you move on. No, it's going to happen again. Sometimes these events would always happen, right? If it was from scale, there will also be another event that is from scale, and that issue might happen again if you're not paying attention, documenting it, and more or less like creating process around it. Okay, so if you look at the design principle, basically back to what we said. Make sure you use all the things we've talked about in terms of like infra as code, cloud formation, CDK, Terraform. If you're not doing AWS, if you're not using AWS tool, but there are so many tools that you can use for IAC, right? And then make frequent small changes, automate response to operational events. So if things happen, sometimes if for example, you have an EC2 instance that you notice that every time there is like a failure, the failure system alarm, the system pretty much shuts down. What you can do is you can set up an automation such that when that kind of event happens, maybe you can restart the machine, and maybe that is good enough, right? And then you can also learn from that failure and then put system in place that can solve it, right? So if you look at some of these services, there's so many, but I just did put some here. So when you talk about IAC Cloud Formation, AWS Config can help you with configuration changes and all the automation that can go around with that. We've seen CloudWatch can do all the monitoring that we've talked about. Systems Manager can do automation for us. Code commits, and the likes of Git can obviously help you with that, the small frequent change that we're talking about. And then code build, code deploy. We've seen that, building your code, deploying them, right? So all these services are really services that are key for you to achieving your operational excellence, meeting that your operational excellence pillar. Security, there's not much to say about security. Although there is much, there is also not much because we've really dealt with security on this course. But the point is, it's a pillar. It's a pillar that you need to keep an eye on, right? So protect information, systems, and asset, right? That's really the focus. And what it means is that you're really, implementing strong identity foundation. First of all, who are your users? How are your users coming in? Are you going to provision users, or are you more or less like bringing your identity? Because sometimes, for example, if your users use Google, for example, it means that if Google is what is bringing them into your system, what it means is that the day you take them off from Google, they stop having access to a lot of your system. So you need to understand, how you're actually giving out credentials, how you're, allowing users to your system, right? So um, it's the focus here is really protecting information and the system and the asset, right? And then you have to enable traceability, meaning who is doing what are they doing, we'll see some of the services, but again, even looking at it, you can tell some of the services that can play in this regards, right? But the point is that you're seeing who is doing what, right? Are you keeping track of what people are doing? If somebody is going to terminate a machine, are you keeping track of that? Apply security at all layers. So one thing is that if you look at the architectures that we've seen, it crosses different layers. And that's why even, for example, some services, you see them encryption at rest, encryption in transit. You have to make sure that at every layer, right, there is security in place. Okay, automate security best practice. If there is a best practice out there for your security, you have to automate it. It's not something that somebody has to do manually for the most part, right? Protect data. I just talked about encryption in transit and rest. Keep people away from data. So a customer's data, for example, production data, you don't need everyone to have access to it. You're just increasing the attack surface, right? Make sure that you're keeping people away from data. Anything can go wrong. It's not even just reducing the surface. Also, if something goes wrong, somebody thought it was like writing a code that is targeting dev environment, and he writes a command to delete something, but all of a sudden that is pointing to prod, and you've deleted customers' data, right? Maybe there is enough backup that can bring things back, but who knows? The damage may have been made. So that's why sometimes you need to keep people away from data. Sometimes they don't need the data, so just keep them away from it. And that's where security comes in, because sometimes you need to basically give people just what they need. If they don't need data, don't give them access to data, because anything can happen, knowingly or unknowingly, right? And then prepare for security event. There'll be days where things happen. You have to more or less like have processes in place that helps you, um, that keeps you prepared for days like that, right? When there's like a security event. So if you look at it, some of the design principles, IAM for identity center, you've seen it. Even just the example that I showed with STS, you see that I was doing cross account access, but I still had to create I had to do more or less like all the plumbing, right? I created 2 different roles. I gave them all the access they needed, the ability to assume, the ability to allow as like another role to assume this role. You have to create all those plumbing, right? You can't just keep things exposed or too privileged, right? That's the whole idea. So IAM does that. We've seen so many examples of doing that, right? Detective controls, things like CloudTrail. In CloudTrail, for example, you can see if I terminate a machine, if there are so many events that you see them, right, and see who does it in CloudTrail, right? Even CloudWatch also, you can see some of those events from the logs. It depends on the service you are dealing with, right? And then infrastructure protection, for example, your VPC, your security groups. We've seen how you can do ingress rules, egress rules. All that can help. And then data protection, not just keeping people away from data, but also the data itself. Encryption, whether it's when the data is moving or when it is resting, you have to do all that. So IAM, KMS, CloudTrail, GuardDuty. Why I'm mentioning it because everybody who has followed me till now, all these services that are here, we've gone through all of them, honestly. So that's why I'm not really paying attention, because I'm not really going to talk about the service. Most of the people who have followed me, IAM, KMS, CloudTrail, GuardDuty, Security Hub. We've talked about them. This is where it comes to play, right? WAF, basically for your web application firewall, Shield, Secret Manager, where you keep secret, right? We've talked about that also. Macy, for example, to protect your what do you call it, your S3 bucket. So all these services, you have to use them where applicable to make sure that you're really following the security pillar. Okay. And what about reliability? You know what, when you say someone is reliable, do you know what it means? It's the same. Your infrastructure too, is it reliable? It's of if you're if like I was mentioning how I was telling somebody that okay, there was an outage recently, but I didn't notice it because I woke up. I was told that there was an outage. I did see the news later, but I wasn't impacted. My application, it's not a small application, but we were not impacted in any way, right? So the question is, does it perform the intended function correctly and consistently? So is it reliable? Is it something you can basically, so this is where we're going to be looking at that pillar. So the focus is really workload performs intended function correctly and consistently, meaning it's not just correctly, but it's also consistent, right? So automatic recovery from failure, for example. So if it can automatically recover from failure, and many things can cause failure, right? Sometimes maybe one AZ is down, right? Or in the last case, there was like a zone, there was a region that was impacted, EU East 1, right? So it means it depends on how you're set up, but the problem that was a failure, right? A failure, whether it's from you or not from you. But the question is that is your system able to automatically recover, right? And we'll be looking at some of the things that empowers that, right? And then test recovery procedures. People take, for example, they take backups, for example. They take backups, but they never even test if their backup can be recovered when something goes wrong, right? So this is where you really need to start thinking about reliability in terms of like your recovery procedures. How are you doing those, right? And then scale horizontally for availability. We've seen that every time we did auto scaling groups, every time we did more than one machine. In EKS is obviously a big, it's a different ball game. But every time you've seen us do load balancer, and we spread it across two different EC2 machines across different availability zones. You're preparing for reliability, right? The fact that you want to be sure that if one AZ goes down, another AZ can still handle the traffic, right? And then stop guessing capacity. You don't guess. You don't say, I think I'll need two machines to handle traffic. No, you have to keep metrics. You have to watch out for like, okay, it means that you have to set metrics in place that says, oh, from what I've seen, one machine will handle 20 users. If I have 40 users, you don't need to guess that. There should be something in place that automatically gives you another machine because now you're having 40 users. So it's not like I'll be guessing, oh, maybe if I have 20 users, I need one machine. No, you have to look at metrics and then you have to have a system in place that can automatically balance itself to handle that. Those are the things that makes your system reliable because you can sleep and know that when your system scales behind your back, your system is covering, right? And those are really the things that guarantees reliability, right? So make change through automation. And that's it. Because if you do things manually and something breaks, sometimes it's hard. It's just like you go to inside your system and you change 10 things, right? Because you didn't do them through automation, if something goes wrong, it might be hard for you to know what did I even change. But when it's through automation, you can basically revert that process because there's a script, an automation script that you run. Okay. So it's very, very important. So when you look at some of the design principles, service quotas, we've seen what that is, more or less like you have to plan, right? If you know that, you're going to be scaling in the next few days, you need to check. Do you have enough quota to scale? You have to think about that. Your network topology, how you're set up. Are you set up in one AZ, multi-AZ? You have to check all those things. Your workload architecture, how it's distributed. Fault isolation also. If there is a fault in one place, will it automatically impact the other side, right? And then change management, more or less like automated changes, and the automated changes are not changes that are manual. And then monitoring is really monitoring. There are so many aspects to monitoring, but in this case, really you have to monitor your system, and then some of them should be able to, more or less like there has to be like monitoring in place for you to see exactly what is going for your system to be reliable, right? And then failure management, backup. It's not just backup also. It's about testing your recovery process, right? Not just taking backups, but have you been able to test these backups that I'm taking? If something was to go wrong, how do I recover, right? And then self-healing. People don't talk about that. Things can go wrong, but the question is, can your system self-heal, right? So these are the things you have to test for you to show that your system is reliable, right? And the thing is, this is real world problem. It's not even about AWS doing web, putting it as a framework. It's real problems that you see in your day-to-day. Because if your system cannot self-heal, then it's not reliable, right? So when you look at some of the services, auto scaling, multi-AZ deployments, Route 53, you know how it is that in Route 53, for example, we can do more or less like failover. You can say if one endpoint is not working, please fail me over to the other endpoints, right? You can use CloudWatch to monitor and then do, auto scaling. You can do systems manager for the automation that we're talking about. You can do backup, right? We talked about the backup service, right? And then you can do automated backups also, for example. So anything that supports backup is just you have to take those backups and you also have to test the recoveries of those backups. That's what shows your system is reliable. It means if your system goes down, you have a way, established way of bringing things back up, right? Cool. So that's pillar 3. Let's continue. So pillar 4, we're talking about performance efficiency. Basically, use compute resources efficiently to meet requirements, right? It's still somehow related. This is, it's basically the idea that use it efficiently. Just use compute resources, use them efficiently. And we're going to talk about how that can be done, right? Because the whole idea is that don't just use compute anyhow, use them efficiently. This is not about cost, it's about the efficiency of the resources that you're using, right? You have a set of requirements, but you have to also use the resources that you have access to, use them efficiently. So if you look at the key principles here is democratize advanced technologies. So what it means is that make powerful tools given to a lot of your team members. The whole idea is that allow them to be able to innovate, right? Because if you lock those tools from them, how will they innovate? For example, you see how agentic AI is everywhere. Everybody's talking about AI. If your developers don't have access to this tool, they would not be able to do much, right? So it means that your performance efficiency will also it also comes from you being able to democratize the technology, especially the advanced ones, right? And then you have to one of the key principles is really being able to go global in minutes, and we've seen all the tools that plays around that side, right? Some of them are mentioned below, but I think by now we've seen when we say go global in minutes, the whole idea is just for you to be completely global, not just something that is within your region, but something that that across the globe people can access your application quickly, right? So use serverless architecture is also one of the good things here. Serverless is good. I mean, you don't need to manage infrastructure if there's no need for you to. Why do you want to take that extra burden when you can pretty much just throw it to serverless and get the same benefit, right? There are better things to worry about. And then experiment more often. So do more experiments. If you really want to be, to increase your performance efficiency, you have to experiment more often. What it means is that, yeah, things are changing and then you have to keep that experiment going, right? So when you look at design principles, you're choosing the appropriate resource types. That's really one of the selection, the selection criteria. The point is that choose appropriate, right? Appropriate resource type. As much as 3 resources can get the same job done, some are more appropriate for the kind of work that you're doing, right? So you have to choose the appropriate one. Review, continuously review the choices that you make. So what it means is that it's not set in stone. You always need to continue to review the process and get better, right? And then track. Monitoring would always be everywhere. You have to track the performance of these things. See in terms of like, what's the response time, what's your latency, all that you need to track them to know, if you are really being efficient performance wise. Okay. So if you look at some of the service, EC2 is there, Lambda, Fargate, storage, it's just about how you're using them efficiently, right? So it cuts across many services, but you've also seen how CloudFront can actually help us, be on the different edge around the world, right? So, and then VPC, Route 53, DynamoDB. DynamoDB is you can do global database with the DynamoDB, right? That databases that spreads across region, right? So the point is that you can have like a multi-region application and DynamoDB can actually power that, right? So there are many things here, but the whole point is that, making sure that you're using your compute efficiently, okay? Let's go to the next pillar. There are like 2 more pillars under this review, under this. So cost optimization, I'm so happy because the last class was entirely about cost. So I'm happy it's coming here. It's also one of the pillars you have to take note of. But the point is deliver business value at lowest price point, right? That's really the goal. The thing is that, yes, you can actually. So implement cloud financial management. We've seen cost management just in the last class, right? So adopt consumption model, which means pay for what you use. If you ever see yourself paying for what you don't use, then something is wrong. Make sure you're only paying for the things you use. So it means if you're not using something and you're paying for it, you're wasting money, right? So that's where cost optimization comes in. So measure overall efficiency. You have to measure it as time goes on. And then let AWS handle the undifferentiated work, right? This one is key. Some people think there is flex in you managing servers. There is no flex in that. If that does not translate to your business, you shouldn't be managing servers. Focus that time on building the things that really matter. Some people think there's flex in throwing out EC2 machine, going there and troubleshooting every day. You don't need that. So it means that if serverless is suited for that use case, use serverless and just have the peace and focus on your business, right? And let AWS run the servers and manage it and do whatever they want to do. So the point is, that's really where I'm talking about handle the undifferentiated. There is that it does not add value to your business, right? Don't spend time there. Rather, spend time on the things that helps your business to grow, and let AWS do the things they are good at doing, right? So financial management is everything we've talked about in the last class. All anything that helps you do, put an eye on your finance in AWS, right? Expenditure awareness, tracking, and allocating cost, and then cost-effective resources, meaning every time you need to do review, right size, do reserved instance, do savings plan. You have to look at all those plans, use them when appropriate, just to cut down your cost, right? And then optimize over time, review and refine. It's not a fixed list. You need to sometimes always go back to it, see how much you were spending and how much you're spending now, what has changed. Continue to review that process. There's so many services that are also mentioned here. The good news is that we've seen all, right? So it's a good way. We're just looking at everything, because cost explorer, we've seen what that is. Budget, we've seen. Pricing calculator, we've also seen. Compute optimizer, absolutely yes, right? You can go and it tells you if your compute is optimized, maybe it's underutilized, maybe it's overutilized. You can see all that, right? Trusted advisor, we've seen how that can tell us, how we can save costs. If you go there, actually, it can tell you some of the things, actions that you can take that can bring down your cost. Reserved instances, these are all ways for you to reserve an instance for a year, for example, and get a lot of benefit. Savings plan, use spot instances. If something you don't really care if the machine goes off and on, maybe your system is that resilient, use spot instances, right? It will save you a lot of money. Okay, let's talk about the last pillar. It's really the new one, right? So this is the new pillar that was added. Everybody's talking about being environmentally friendly, right? So sustainability, right? Minimize environmental impact of your cloud workloads. The point is that just understand your impact. That's really one of the principles here. More or less like understanding your impact. I think everyone is talking about, and that's why you see I did put a green image here. But the point is that it's all about being eco-friendly, right? Being friendly to your environment, right? So establish like a sustainability goal. Maximize pretty much utilization to make sure that you are not wasting things, right? For example, if you have like a machine that is running and it's only using 20%, that means the 80% you're just using power, but you're not doing anything. So it's not good. It's not good. When you utilize properly, you're practicing sustainability. I don't know if you listen correctly, you understand what I said. But what it means is that you don't let things waste. If you have like an EC2 machine and it's already always utilized at 10%, the 90% that you're wasting, you're burning resource and you're not being friendly to the environment. Okay. So, and then anticipate and adopt more efficient offerings, right? So more ways for you to bring that down. You can. And then use managed service. Honestly, there's no point you stressing. If there's a managed service that does it, AWS behind the scene will make sure they are working hard to make sure that whatever they are building is environmentally friendly. So the more managed service you use, it's more or less like you're offloading that burden for AWS to handle that for you, right? So choose efficient regions. Some regions are, they are more environmentally friendly than some. You'll find out as time goes on, right? And then use efficient architecture patterns. What it means is that two patterns might give you the same result, but some might be efficient, right? Especially anyone that has to do with serverless, where you're not really managing the servers yourself. Those are more eco-friendly, right? For example, if you're also using like the new Graviton instances from AWS, right? So instead of using the normal EC2 instance, you can also use the Graviton instance, because AWS is really promoted that instance to tell you that yes, this one was rebuilt with the environment in mind, right? And then you can also right size your workloads. So right size, don't just use workloads. Right size, make sure you're using the right workloads for your job. Okay. Use manage serverless and managed services. These you're handling more responsibility to AWS, and the more responsibility you're handling to them, it means that they can cover you on many of those fronts, right? There is a tool called the customer carbon footprint. It's there in AWS. You can go there and measure and just see pretty much how you're doing in terms of like how you are doing, and if your architecture is environmentally friendly. You can There's a tool that can do that. And you know how we've talked about S3 intelligent tiering, for example, the fact that after a while your data, if it's cold, it can be moved to a more colder storage, right? And that is good. It's a good practice. Doing things like lifecycle, EFS, for example, has that, where you can move things from being hot to being cold, right? All that would use less energy to do stuff. And Lambda, Fargate, all these serverless offerings also are some of the services that you see in this category. Okay, so all the things that we've talked about, there is a tool. There is a free tool that can actually help you measure. So sometimes whenever you hear well-architected tool, there is a tool basically, and what it means is that it's just a free tool in AWS, but it can basically review your workloads against best practice, identify areas that you can do improvement, and then generate improvement plans. So all the things we've seen, if you don't want to go in one after the other or reviewing it with an AWS team, you can use this tool to basically identify your workloads and review it, right? And then AWS can help you generate a finding that would more or less like tell you the areas that needs improvement. Okay, it's a tool. You can check it if you have an AWS account. Just type the well-architected tool and you see it. And then it needs some information from you. Once you provide that information, it can actually generate a report for you. Okay. And again, we talked about sustainability. That's where it comes to customer carbon footprint. There's also a tool, right, where you can see your carbon footprint. Everybody's trying to more or less like, be friendly, more friendly to the environment, right? So it's all tied to the sustainability. That's why sustainability is not a pillar, right? But there's also a tool that can actually measure, your footprint, right? More or less like, and you can track that as time goes on, right? So it shows carbon emissions over time by service and region. You can actually compare your AWS cloud versus if this same thing was to run on premise. It's basically a tool that can help you visualize that, right? AWS aims for 100% renewable energy by 2025. So AWS is doing a lot of work to make sure that they are using a lot of renewable energy. But there's a tool that basically can help you also see that. It's also in the AWS console called the carbon footprint tool. This tool works hand in hand with you, almost like being following the last pillar that we talked about, right? Sustainability, right? So use case, corporate sustainability tracking. You want to track how the things you are doing, how how it ties back to your sustainability goal, and then demonstrate carbon reduction progress. Like you can actually see, because you can see a graph that can keep track of how well you're doing over time, right? But again, there's like some footprints here. I think I've talked about Graviton instance. It's good. It's good. I think there was a time I made a post about it. How it can really save you a lot of. It saves you in terms of money, and it's also more friendly to the environment, right? And then serverless wherever needed, and then you can always use auto scaling. Don't Because auto scaling would only scale when there is need for it, and for that reason, it means that you're only using the right capacity, right? So those are all. It helps you have less carbon footprint. Okay. That brings us to the cloud adoption framework. It's a very nice one because this one is the one that I'm passionate about talking about, and the reason is because everyone at some point are not in the cloud, so they need to go to the cloud, right? And the cloud adoption framework is just basically, if you were not in the cloud today, if you were going to go to the cloud, what is the framework you're going to use? That's really what the cloud adoption framework is about. Remember, the well-architected review or the well-architected framework is talking about you are in the cloud, how well you should optimize the things that are already running in the cloud. But when you're talking about adoption, this is you. You're not yet. You're pretty much trying to navigate to the cloud. So it's how you adopt and how you migrate. Okay. So whenever you see any of these two frameworks, don't confuse them. They serve different purposes, right? So guidance for cloud adoption and migration is really what CAF is all about. Organized cloud transformation journey, right? So it's like your transformation journey now to the cloud and in an organized manner, right? So identifies gaps that you would see, and then based on AWS experience with thousands of customers. Remember, people have migrated to the cloud. In fact, as we are speaking, somebody's migration is ongoing. So AWS has seen all that, and that's why this framework exists, right? So accelerate your cloud adoption, reduce business risk. Trust me, when you move to the cloud, a lot is changing. Your infra is changing. So you need to also weigh that in and make sure that you're reducing any risk that can come out of it, right? So improve the business outcome, which is obviously what everyone is looking out for, right? Align technology and business strategies. And there are basically six perspectives that we're going to see, but it's broken down into just 2 slides so that we can digest it just once, right? Uh, and then you will see the action plans and the best practices. Okay, so when you think about the domain, it's four. There's technology part of it, which is more or less like the migration and the modernization. We've also talked about some tools that helps us do that, right? So application portfolio rationalization, new cloud development, all the new cloud native development that you're going to be doing. So everything that has to do with the technology part is under this framework. There's also the process, right? Because your process will change if you move to the cloud. I think I've always told people here that if you start an on-prem environment and you start moving to the cloud, many things will change. The way you do things before will change to support your cloud migration. Some tools you may have to abandon, which means there's a new set of process that will emerge, right? So digitize, automate, optimize operations, platform engineering, data analytics, all these things are new things that are going to happen as part of the process, right? So what about organization? You have to basically, new skills, training, reimagining operational models. So there's a lot of organizational change that is also going to happen for you to be able to support your cloud adoption, right? And then the product itself. So innovation, experimentation, and reimagining the business model now, right? Because from a product perspective, it's now you have to relook at the product compared to when it was not on the cloud, right? So we're not going to look at the business perspective first. So we'll look at the business perspective. Most times it's always about who are the stakeholders and what is their focus around that line, right? And I've broken it into two slides. So the business perspective is talking about what to do. That's really the business perspective, right? The business perspective is talking about what to do, and there you're looking at, if you look at the business perspective, it's really about what to do, right? What are you going to do as part of your adoption phase, right? So if you look at the stakeholders, you're talking about the business managers, the finance, the budget. If you mention all those names, it's obviously clear what do you think they are going to think about. They'll be thinking about the business value from the cloud, the return on investment, ROI, right? So as part of it here, for example, you're looking at things like manage data and cloud enabled offerings as products. You're looking at everything that has to do like the data monetization, so leverage data to more or less like obtain measurable business benefits. They're all broken down there, but the whole point is that you're looking at all, you're doing business insight, you're doing data monetization, you're doing, strategic partnership, build or grow your business through a strategic with your cloud provider. So the point is that you're building a partnership. The whole idea there is really you're focusing on the business value, right? From the cloud, and then your return on investment. But there's also the people perspective, right? When you think about it, that's where HR comes in, staffing comes in, the people manager comes in, and the focus will be culture. See, cloud is a culture, you like it or not. Cloud itself is a culture because I've seen it. I've seen people who were completely on premise that moved to the cloud, and I know how much it needed for them to understand. Oh, this is a new world. This is how to, So it's a culture. You have to build that culture when people move to the cloud, right? So that's why there's a people perspective, because why? It's culture. You can see, I didn't even know, I've forgotten that there's culture in the cloud, but there's culture, there's org structure, there's talent development, meaning you have to develop people, right? So that's where the people perspective side is focused on. So things like, assess and evolve organization design for, alignment, basically. So there's going to be some reorganization, some re-strategization, right, around your people to be able to, more or less like operate well now that you're in a new place, right? Because yeah, you've moved completely. So, evaluate, incrementally evolve and codify organizational culture. I mean, you don't need to more or less like know these things word for word, but you just need to know the people and the actors in each level, right? So the people side will basically focus on the culture, the org structure, the talent development, just to support your move to the cloud, right? And then when you're not talking about governance, that's where the people like the CIO, the program managers, the architects are. And their focus will be to align that IT with business, right? And they minimize risk. Because there, you're really thinking about governance, right? So like how do you want to gather your data? So there's data curation, for example, like organize an inventory of data products in a data catalog. So all those kind of things that can help you govern, right? Govern better is really what you are discussing at this perspective. So one of it is also things like leverage cloud to lower your risk profile, right? So risk profile management is also something you'll be thinking about at the governance level. And things like cloud financial management, so more or less like plan, measure, and optimize your cloud spend is something governance you have to be handling, right? So the people side of things, governance is really everything around, governing, um, and then the business is really they're interested in the money, the monetary in terms of the value from the cloud and the return of investment. Okay, so but there's just one slide, you can use it to basically just have an idea what each one does, right? And then the technical. I'm more technical, so I don't really fall on the last slide because I'm a technical person. But this is really where you're talking about the technical, right? So how to, the first one was talking about what to do, but here is really how to do it. How do we do it, right? And then this is where you're talking about the platform perspective, right? Platform is really the platform itself. So CI/CD, the data architecture, the platform engineering, data engineering, all those beautiful things that happen at the platform level, right? So rapidly evolving, improve application and services, build well architected cloud native applications. So everything that happens really on the platform side is really what the platform will focus on. So what are the names you'll be seeing there? CTO, the architect, the engineers. Like that's why I said that. That's why I fall in, right? But the focus is really to build hybrid cloud and then modernize the workload, right? Because again, I mean, if you're migrating, sometimes it's hybrid, and then you have to basically now modernize for you to do more or less like your full transitioning, right? And then there's also the security. The security, as we know, the CISO, the security architect, their focus will also be confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? The point is that you're looking at everything around security: threat detection, vulnerability management, data protection, application security, your response to incidents response, and then security governance, everything around even identity and access management is a focus area. And there are a set of people who take the leading stage in that area. And then we're not talking about operations perspective, right? So you're doing IT operations, support managers, their focus is really run, use, operate, recover workloads, right? While the platform guys are building, operations perspective is really dealing on the running, the using, and the operating of those workloads, right? That's where you're thinking about observability, you're thinking about configuration management, patch management, availability and continuity. There's so many things that falls in that angle, right? And that's why I put it. But these are all just, it's like a framework that talks about what is needed and who is responsible for what, right? And it can really help you, do your cloud migration and move to the cloud, adopt the cloud successfully. Okay. There are many, many details, but the point is that you just need, I think the most important thing is really who are the stakeholders at each stage and what is their focus, right? Once you know that, I think you're good to go, right? I mean, in the real grand scheme of things, some people might have multiple plays to play. Obviously, technical may play a huge role here, but some people might also just play a role in just one of the perspective, right? So it just depends. But these are some things you get used to as you embrace the cloud. Okay. Now let's talk about the things that are things that you need to get used to also as part of your journey in the cloud, right? So there's really what they call the AWS Partner Network. It's something you need to get used to. It's like a global community of AWS partners, and they help customers to build on AWS. So whenever you hear an AWS partner, they are one of the largest recruiters also of cloud engineers or cloud developers, just so you know. So whenever you see an AWS, you can actually go to AWS, for example, and look for AWS partners, right? The good thing about them is that you can see they help customers to build on AWS. So if you ever work with an AWS partner, just know that you'll be building with AWS. You'll build a lot, right? So they're actually technology and consulting partners, and there is a lot of them, big ones, mid ones, small ones. The whole idea is that they can actually help other companies to more or less like they can help other companies to build on AWS. So if like a company is there and they don't have like enough staff to help them they can go and find like an AWS partner to help them move to the cloud or build in the cloud. Okay. There are so many types. Technology partners, provide software solutions on AWS. There's consulting partners, there's training partners, there's competency partners. There's so many partners, right? And they all fall into partner tiers. You can have advanced premier tiers depending on how capable the partner is, right? And then based on customer success and technical capability, the point is that there is something called the AWS Partner Network, and they are just basically a global community of they partner with AWS to help people build on AWS. Okay, so sometimes some companies will rely on them to do things, whether it's about optimizing their costs, building a new architecture in the cloud. So they're also very good companies to work for if you really want to gain AWS skills. Okay, AWS partners are good people to work with. And then there is also AWS Marketplace that you see as part of your journey as you grow. Marketplace is basically you can find a solution. You can find a solution that already exists. It's a digital catalog of third-party software. So the point is that if you go to your account, you go to AWS Marketplace, you can see catalogs of people, of companies that you can basically plug into. More or less, like for example, there's like a service, maybe Sentry for error monitoring. Maybe you can go to Marketplace and find a Sentry offering and just plug into it to tell you how much it's going to cost you, what you need to set to configure it, and that's it. So instead of you building it yourself, you can just buy it off the marketplace, right? Easy deployment to the AWS, consolidated billing through AWS. So the billing, AWS will do all that as part of your bills, right? You can get infrastructure software, firewall, databases, whatever. Just think about some people, they just don't want to like go through the stress of building themselves. They can go to the marketplace and find machine learning, AI solution, developer tools, DevOps, name it. Trust me, there's so many of them. And you can also build even marketplace tools as you grow in your journey. You can basically build markets. There's obviously different pricing model, but the most important thing is one-click deployment, single bill from AWS. Some will allow you to try it for free. Okay, so marketplace, play with it, check it, and see what it looks like. If you ever will one day find something in the marketplace that will suit your need. When you don't think about what are the other ecosystems that exist, so AWS IQ used to be a very big one, and it's still there. It's just that it will stop from May 28 to 2026. The AWS is stopping it, but it used to be where you can connect with AWS certified experts. They can help you with your on-demand project work. Pay for completed milestones. Let's assume you're working on a project. You're an AWS customer, for example. You're working on a project. You don't have a team of dedicated AWS engineers, or maybe you have a few of them, and you need some. AWS Q used to be a place where you can find connect with AWS certified. You see the keyword there. It's not just AWS expert. Their certification is one of the good requirements that you need. So AWS certified expert. Migration help, architectural review, troubleshooting, whether something is not working, you need an expert to check. But they are discontinuing that now. And then there's repost, basically. So these are tools you need to get. If you really are doing AWS, you need to be familiar with many of these things that I'm showing you. So things like repost, community-driven QA service, replacement for AWS forums, ask and answer AWS questions. That's another place where, and the links are here. Repost.aws is really where you can find, community-driven question and answer service, right? IQ is paid expert for projects. Repost it's a free community support place where you can go for knowledge sharing. Okay, these tools are there. Some you find maybe when you type something on Google, it might link you to one of these websites. But I'm just calling them out because as an AWS engineer or somebody who is aspiring, these are things you need to get from. You need to familiarize yourself with as time goes on. Okay, there's also Knowledge Center. So there is repost.aws/knowledge center, which is frequently asked question style knowledge base, and that's where you find it. Troubleshooting guides, free and public. It's free, publicly accessible. Common questions and solutions. It's one of the things you find. Okay, and then if you think about the AWS resource documentation, there is also white papers in there. AWS blogs, AWS training. Trust me, if you really want to push your AWS journey further, there is a lot of free AWS training that comes from AWS themselves that you can actually key into. Okay, just know that there's a lot of resources out there, right, for you to start, right? And don't feel overwhelmed. There is just a lot of resources out there that you can start with, right? And we've looked at the support channels, obviously, before now, developer, business, enterprise, and then all these support channels that you can find, right? The basic, developer, business, and enterprise. And then obviously there's health dashboard if you want to see like the service health status of your application, right? So that brings us to a summary. And what have we looked at? We've looked at STS as on the practical side, because I feel that as you go, you begin to see more or less like, okay, I want to be able to do something is in a different account. That's why I actually wanted to show you how STS work. Sometimes you use it behind the scene, but you don't know. And that's why I did take my time to create like a small demo just for you to see how it works. We looked at the well-architected framework, 6-pillar, operational excellence, security, reliability, performance efficiency, customer optimization, sustainability, right? Sustainability is something that is new, but you have to also pay attention to it. We looked at the well-architected tool for workload reviews. It's a tool you can use. We looked at customer carbon footprint tool for sustainability tracking. It's there. It's in your AWS account. You can use it if you want. And then we looked at the cloud adoption and the ecosystem, right? So this is perspective for pretty much the six perspectives that we talked about and the four transformation domains also, right? And then we talked about partner network, AWS marketplace. Please, partner network is very important, right? You see them as you grow, right? And then IQ for expert help, repos for community support, and then knowledge center and extensive documentation. And I'm calling these because these are things that will become part of you, and you will find yourself either finding yourself in blogs, finding yourself in sometimes you may need to implement a marketplace tool. Sometimes you probably are inside of repost. All these things are things that you're going to start, you get used to as time goes on, which is good for me to introduce it before we end this series, okay? And I'm happy we've come to the end of this class. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you've learned a thing or two.